I don't really have any answers, but I am a bit cross about the tax on houses that might be over 2 million. I mean, is it definitely going to be over 2 million?
Yeah.
Do we know that yet?
Yeah. Well, I mean, as much as we know anything. Do you know, once if a Chancellor had to resign just a few decades ago, if any details got leaked to the media before the actual budget day, by the time Rachel Reeves stands up tomorrow, they're going to have released the full details twice, retracted them, and then released the new version again. But anyway, we digress. It looks almost certain that 2 million quid will be the threshold.
Okay, which in some areas is actually not that expensive. So you might have a house somewhere worth 2 million up north. The same house would be worth, say, 1 million. So that, and you might work for a company that pay the same wherever you live. So there's that. And then also, I know
that doesn't really work, because if you're going to buy the best house you can afford wherever you are. So if you're living in the north parts of the not everybody, but almost everybody buys the best house they can afford. Same with most of their purchases. You buy the best thing you can afford, and therefore, if you're living in the northeast, you're going to have a way bigger house for your 2 million quid than you are if you're living in Putney.
Well, what about this? And what if you can't afford to move, but all you've done all your whole life is you've extended and renovated?
Well, how come you can't afford to move?
Because, so my husband is a plumber, my sons are electricians, so we do our own work, and we work really hard. And
is your house worth over £2 million?
No, not at the moment.
Okay.
But
it might be one day. If you carry on building these
yeah.
extensions, it might be one day.
But it's lovely. But my sons as well. My husband at the moment is just building a little extension on my son's 1-bedroom house to give him 2 bedrooms because they can't afford to move. But the other thing I wanted to say was about, I know this is controversial, but poll tax in the day. Yeah. I had lots of friends that their children went to court because they couldn't afford it. But that is fair, because you might have a £2 million house with one person in it, and you might have a £1,999,000 with 6 people living in it.
Yeah.
But they're all having the same, they're not taking, they're rubbish.
This isn't really working, is it?
What's not working? On the radio?
Yeah.
Or...
I mean, you're casting around a lot. We're now talking about the poll tax, which hasn't really existed since the 1980s.
No, I know, but
tell me why. Tell me why it would not be fair for someone who can afford to live in a £2.5 million house to pay £4.5 grand a year in tax, because they can, and they can be compelled to do so.
Okay, so what if you are a couple that have got a £2 million house, you have a child, pass away, and your child inherits the house, but they are just, whatever.
And then you put a charge on. Then you put a charge on it, so no one takes any money at all until the house is sold.
It's just, I think it's unfair on people that do work hard to have nice houses.
Newsflash. Most people who work hard do not live in houses worth more than £2 million. The percentage of people living in houses worth that kind of money is infinitesimal, and some of them don't work at all. But there are millions of people in this country who work every hour God sends, who could not dream of ever living in a house worth that much.
I know that, but I do think there needs to be a different way. I honestly don't think that doing that it's going to ruin everything. It's going to make house prices won't move because people won't move.
That's good, isn't it? That makes everything more affordable.
You think so?
I don't know. I mean, usually the reason why young people can't get on the property ladder is because everything's too expensive.
It is, and in this area, I mean, my poor son and his girlfriend, their little tiny one-bed house.
If I forced you to give me in a sentence the reason why you don't like this, what would you say? Because at the moment, honestly, I don't really know.
I don't like the fact that it might affect people that are living in a house that they've had their whole lives.
Well, I've got one of those. I've got one of those, and I do honestly think that the comeback to that is the charge. So here you go. Fiona is exactly the person of whom you speak. We bought our house in 1976 for £30,000. It's now worth £1.5 million. So you wouldn't actually be affected, but let's pretend it's worth £2.5 million. However, I'm a pensioner. I don't have a big pension. The cost of downsizing is prohibitive. It's not, of course, but I mean, I take your point. Unless you've remortgaged to the point where you'd have to give the majority of that £1.5 million back to the bank. I live in Essex on the Central Line. I can't afford to pay what sounds like a huge amount of tax. When I die, my kids will have a huge inheritance tax on the house. Not if you're not in it anymore. And I don't really see how the charge of £4,500 a year for all the years that you're in a really expensive house but you can't afford to pay can be argued with. And I tell you what, let's be even kinder. Let's take the charge off before inheritance tax is applied. And I mean, can't afford to downsize. Don't want to downsize, but can't afford to downsize. But listen, Tracey speaks for a lot of people, as indeed does Fiona, neither of whom are actually affected by it. That's the beauty of right-wing approaches to tax, is that you just persuade people that they could be on the hook for this one day, and therefore they should oppose it.
I think the budget is deliberately going to create more division between people, because people who are the super rich, they have funds spread in multitude of scenarios that we don't even know about.
Yeah, but if they've got a mansion, they'll be on the hook for this. I appreciate offshore trusts and ways of dodging things. These exist. But anyone who can be compelled, are you really going to go to the trouble of setting up an offshore trust to save yourself $5,000 a year on a property tax?
The problem is there might be people who live in... Because am I right in thinking it's the free top bands where they're going to increase this mansion tax?
That's what it looks like at the moment.
Yeah, but just because somebody lives in band F or G, that doesn't mean they might have not a great deal of money in the bank. So they're still not based on ability to pay in deliberately...
no, they're doing it on the most visible, the most easily visible asset.
Which is, yes. So
which is your house, which is your home. So this is where I demand that you come up with a better idea.
I think it should be based on ability to pay, because the problem is at the moment...
If you've got a £2 and a bit million house, you can pay. And if you can't pay today, you can pay tomorrow, because I'll stick a charge on it, and when the house is sold, we'll take the money that we're owed.
But is it still going to be based on the amount of people in the house?
No.
And this is the unfair thing.
It's the value of the house. It's not unfair. Yeah, it's the fairest thing they could possibly come up with, except an income tax rise. And they won't do that because they're terrified of... Well, they've made a manifesto pledge not to, and they're terrified of what will happen to them if they break it. So come up with a better idea. Come up with a better idea.
I think there should be a local tax based... It should be based on the ability to pay and how much money people have in the bank. Because there might be people...
So that's a tax on savings. That's a tax on savings.
But if people have... I mean, there are some people who have...
They're doing tax on... I mean, they're changing pension rules to raise a bit of quids. So they're already doing that. You need to replace the 400 million, which they probably won't raise anyway, but are going to try to, but by introducing this. I mean, what else is there? If not property. Also, if you introduce your rule, then I'm just going to buy a bigger house tomorrow with all the money that I've currently got in the bank.
The problem is the top band of tax is 40%. Am I correct in thinking that?
No, it's 45.
Oh, it's 45. So if someone is on a huge gargantuan salary, they're still paying less than, say, someone on £100,000.
Yeah, but we've already said we can't do... They're not going to do income tax. They've been scared off doing income tax. I'd do income tax. You're objecting to the mansion tax. I don't really understand why.
I object to it in the sense that people who are just above the band in, say, F, they might be affluent, but they're not super rich.
They live in a £2 and a bit million house. You're in Richmond, Barry. I presume not Richmond in Yorkshire.
No, yeah, but my flat's not worth...
No, I know yours isn't. You're sticking up for people who somehow...
I'm not sticking... No,
well, you are. If you're living in a £2.5 million house and you can't find £4,500 a year, then you really should just move.
I've never voted Conservative, actually.
I'm not talking about your politics. I'm not talking about your house. I'm just pointing out that we have this mythical idea that there are people living in £2.5 million houses who are being held hostage. Arnold Schwarzenegger's out the back door with an Uzi saying, "You cannot leave this house." If you can't find £4,500 a year and you're living in a house that is in the top tiny % of the entire country, then move.
Yeah, I mean...
I would.
Well, yeah,
you would.
I think the way things are going in this country, and I think it's just it's symptomatic of what's going on.
No, I'm not having that. No, you can't just go back to your comforting phrases like division and symptomatic. What would you do differently? And if not them, then who?
You mentioned about, people raking up leaves, working in the cold, whether it's roofers, road workers, etc., and stuff like that. So I actually fit into that category. I come from a council house. My wife comes from a council house as well. And we've worked since the age of 16 extremely hard, 6 days a week, to provide for our family. We also live in a house that's well over £2 million. And obviously this mansion tax is a huge worry for us because obviously we put all of our money and savings, etc., renovations and so on into this property that we'd like to hand down to our children. And at the same time, I think it's a little bit unfair that we're going to be taxed on something. One, I've paid a huge amount of tax in as I've gone along, and two, I've come from nothing. So it's not as if I'm sitting around doing any, not working hard, not out on the street, etc., and stuff like that. So just as I say, I mean, that's where I feel it's a little bit unfair.
I don't really understand which bit of your biography you think should exclude you from this tax.
Well, the fact that why should I be penalised for work? So what does it say to someone who so if you want to achieve things in life, what does it say to someone that if you get to a certain point you have to pay more tax?
Well, you already do. We already live in that society. That's what tax thresholds do on income tax.
And I get that, and I think they should be putting up income tax. I think they should be keeping an eye on what they spend on welfare. Yeah. Keeping an eye on how much, if are people actually entitled to mobility cards, etc., and stuff like that, rather than just wasting money. I know we're going a little bit off piste here, but we are
and we're not, because you don't arrive at opinions like that by accident. You could turn on the laziest phone-in host in the world and he'll be talking about motability and benefits, and people like you in your £2.5 million house will be thinking, why don't we go after that person there, that disabled person with a car? Why are you coming after me in my £2.5 million house? So it isn't off-piste, is it? It's very, very relevant to this conversation, because that's what you've ended up believing.
But at the end of the day, what you should be doing as well, they should be doing checks to see if everyone actually needs all of this as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We shouldn't be talking about people in £2.5 million houses paying a few grand a year. We should be talking about disabled people in cars.
So, but what I'm saying to you, when
I know what you're saying to me. I'm listening to every word, Rob.
But what I'm saying is, when I started off, I was in the council house, and I've tried.
And if you were still there, you wouldn't have to pay a mansion tax. But you're not. So what?
But that makes all you're doing is just is completely one-sided.
What do you mean it's completely one-sided? I'm going to get hit with it. I'm going to get hit with it as well. We're on the same side. We're both going to be able to do our patriotic duty and plug some of the holes caused by ludicrous political decisions over the last 14 years.
Absolutely, but at the same time, the government needs to turn around and say, right, well, where can we save money?
Let's go after more disabled people.
No, it's not. So again, that's
the one you came up with, Rob. That's the one you reached for first,
mate. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that you need to be more careful. You need to be more.
Well, I've got good news for you. BMW and Audi cars are going to be removed from the car scheme for disabled.
Absolutely, because I was with someone at the weekend and they said that the amount of money that is wasted on these is just astronomical.
Yeah, but it's the same amount of money regardless of whether you drive a tiny car or a big car. It's the allowance that you get that you choose to put towards whatever car you want. How is that wasted?
Putting up mansion tax, how much is that going to raise? It's going to probably
about
raise
400 million, maybe. Yeah, that's what they hope. Million.
Whereas I'd rather pay a little bit more tax and it be distributed correctly.
But not to disabled people with cars, though.
Sorry?
Not to disabled people with cars.
No, I'd rather it be if they need it, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
So why do you think that story in the last 6 months has become so big, Rob?
Because
12 months ago you never gave it a second thought. What do you think has happened in the last 6 months that has made a nice bloke with regards to the Motability scheme? It's made a nice bloke like you think that the reason why I shouldn't have to pay a mansion tax is all these disabled people driving around in cars that they don't deserve. How do you think that happened, mate?
It's not just that.
That's the first thing you raised when you rang this programme.
If you let me speak for 1 second.
If you'll answer the question that I've asked, how do you think that happened?
With regards to, because obviously it's been publicly made, people are being made aware of it.
By whom?
More often. By everyone.
Not by everyone. By whom?
It's common knowledge that there's a lot of people on benefits.
Wasn't talked about 12 months ago. What has happened? Why is it the first thing you reach for? Robin Rickmansworth, looking for reasons why he shouldn't pay tax on his £2.5 million house, is talking about disabled people in Motability vehicles. How has that happened?
You've missed the point completely.
Of course I have, Rob.
You've missed the point completely.
Well, remind me what it is.
What I was saying to you was that when I started working, we had nothing. We've worked extremely hard.
I heard all that. Okay? That's not a point. That's a biography. I'll wait for it to be published.
Why should we be penalised?
Why should I be penalised?
Why should we be penalised when the
disabled people are driving around in cars
isn't being utilised correctly?
Oh, that's a different. No, that's not what you're saying. You're saying you shouldn't pay it because you've worked hard and you grew up in a council house. And I'm saying, what's that got to do with the price of eggs?
I'm saying the money, the tax as well. Okay, I've no problem in paying more income tax. No problem at all. I think that's the way it should be done. More income tax, clever spending on welfare. Cut the welfare slightly.
Which bits, mate?
Sorry?
Which bits?
again, it's not. I'm not down to that, to make that. And I know you're going to say, well, you made that accusation, but at the same time, I just think it needs to be.
I know you do. I know you do, and you're not alone. And loads of people think that they shouldn't be paying more tax. And fair play to you for thinking you should be paying more income tax, but that goes on welfare as well, and that goes on Motability. And with the greatest of respect, if I was having a phone in about whether or not you should pay more income tax, you might be ringing me to tell me that you'd happily pay a mansion tax, but you don't think you should be paying more income tax. We've got no way of pinning that down. But listen to yourself, and I say this with love. The idea that the financial plight of this country is caused by people in Motability vehicles, people on universal credit, or asylum seekers in hotels is absolutely ridiculous. But it has been very deliberately, very carefully, and very successfully seeded in the minds of perfectly decent people like you. And it goes hand in hand. The reason why the rhetoric is so attractive is because we think it lets us off the hook. We somehow think that it will make us better off to resist these kind of ideas, but it doesn't. It really doesn't make us better. The only thing that makes us better off is a proper redistribution of wealth. And that involves going after the people who own the newspapers and who buy the television stations and who punt the rhetoric that has got you complaining about the Motability scheme in the context of a conversation about paying $2 or $3 grand a year for the privilege of living in one of the most expensive houses in the country. And that's the end of my TED talk.